You're 11 weeks past conception. No lungs that work yet. No eyes that open. Barely a face. And right now, on a grainy ultrasound screen, you throw your head back and yawn, a full, slow-motion jaw drop caught on video by researchers at the University of Durham in 2012. You've never breathed air in your life. You've never sat through a status meeting that could have been an email. So who exactly told you to do that? Here's what most people think they know about yawning. Your brain is starving for oxygen, so your body forces your mouth open to gulp in more air. It's tidy. It's intuitive. It's also almost certainly wrong, and this video is going to walk you through the exact experiment that broke that theory in half. Before we get there, hold on to this. There's a real official word scientists use for the full body stretch, and yawn instinct wired into you. One specific enough that once you hear it, you'll never think about stretching in bed the same way again. I'm not giving it to you yet. You'll get it at the very end, and it's going to reframe everything in between. Let's start with the man who basically invented this field almost by accident. Robert Provine, a psychologist at the University of Maryland, spent the mid-1980s doing something no one had bothered to do before. He sat undergraduates in a room, played them 5 minutes of a videotaped face yawning on a loop, and counted how many yawned back. Nearly half did. That part wasn't shocking. What was shocking is what happened when he tried to explain why. You'd assume, reasonably, that a yawn is your lungs sending an SOS. Blood oxygen dips. Carbon dioxide builds. Brain panics. Mouth flies open to fix it. It's the story your biology teacher probably told you somewhere between mitosis and the diagram of a cell you never looked at again. Here's the pattern interrupt. It's not the story your own bloodstream tells. Provine tested it directly. He had participants breathe air enriched with extra oxygen. If the hunger theory were true, yawning should have dropped. Their blood was already flush with the thing they were supposedly gasping for. It didn't drop, not even slightly. Then a separate group breathed air loaded with extra carbon dioxide, the exact gas buildup that's supposed to trigger a yawn in the first place. Yawning frequency stayed exactly the same. You could double someone's oxygen or spike their carbon dioxide, and the yawn rate wouldn't move an inch. Whatever a yawn is doing, it has almost nothing to do with your lungs. So what is it about? This is where it gets genuinely strange. And you should start paying attention to your own jaw right about now, because there's a decent chance it's already twitching. One leading theory belongs to Andrew Gallup, a researcher who started chasing this idea at Princeton and later took it to SUNY Polytechnic. Gallup's hypothesis, yawning is a brain cooling mechanism, a biological radiator flush. The deep inhale and jaw stretch increase blood flow to your face and neck, and the rush of air across your sinuses acts like a fan across a hot engine block. In 2007, Gallup manipulated skull temperature in rats and tracked yawn frequency directly against it. The warmer the rats' brains ran, the more they yawned. Cool. The brain artificially, and yawning dropped off. It's why, Gallup argues, you're more likely to yawn on a warm day than a freezing one, and why a yawn shows up right as you're shifting between mental states, falling asleep, waking up, sliding from boredom into focus, because those are exactly the moments your brain's thermostat works hardest. That's a satisfying answer for why you yawn alone in a quiet room. It explains almost nothing about why you're yawning right now in this exact sentence, just because I describe someone else's yawn to you. That's a different phenomenon. It runs on a different engine entirely. Here's the myth I promise to correct. Most people assume contagious yawning is just regular yawning triggered by watching instead of feeling tired. It isn't. It's a separate switch, wired through a different part of the brain, and it flips on earlier in your life than almost anyone realizes, which loops us back to that 11-week-old on the ultrasound screen. That yawn wasn't contagious. There was nobody in the womb to catch it from. By the time you're an infant, something changes. By early childhood, the contagion switch is live. Here's a detail worth repeating at a dinner party because it sounds invented and isn't. Researchers testing children found that kids don't reliably catch yawns from other people until around age 5, roughly the same window when they start reliably understanding that other people have thoughts and feelings different from their own. Two developmental milestones arriving almost on the same clock. Nobody has fully explained why. It's a thread dangling in front of researchers unpulled. Which brings us to the theory that made contagious yawning famous in neuroscience, and also the one that's gotten messier than the headlines let on. In 2003, Stephen Platek, working in Gordon Gallup's lab at SUNY Albany, proposed that catching a yawn is tangled up with theory of mind, your brain's ability to model what's happening inside someone else's head. Platek found people who scored lower on self-awareness and social cognition were less likely to catch a yawn from watching someone else do it. Later work built on this. Children on the autism spectrum, and adults scoring high on measures of psychopathic traits. Both caught yawns less often than the general population. The implication landed like a small earthquake. Your susceptibility to a stranger's yawn might be a rough, involuntary readout of how wired you are for empathy. It's a great story. According to bigger, more recent studies, it's probably too clean. In 2014, two researchers at Duke, Alex Bartholomew and Elizabeth Cerulli, ran a much larger test, 328 participants, watching 3 full minutes of continuous yawning tracked across repeat sessions to see if the trait even held steady. It did. Your yawn susceptibility turns out to be remarkably stable, almost like a fixed personal trait, closer to your resting heart rate than to your mood. But when they lined it up directly against empathy scores, the correlation was weak to non-existent. Age explained a small slice. Younger adults catch yawns more than older adults. But even restricted to adults under 40, age accounted for only about 8% of the difference between people. The other 92% is still unaccounted for, which means the tidy yawning proves your empathetic line, you've probably absorbed from a psych lecture or a shared Facebook post a decade ago, is a myth wearing a lab coat. It might connect to empathy somehow. It is absolutely not a clean empathy thermometer. Here's where it stops being about you specifically, and starts being about something older than your species. Contagious yawning isn't uniquely human. Chimpanzees catch yawns from watching videos of other chimps, confirmed by researcher Matthew Campbell working alongside primatologist Frans de Waal. Gelada baboons do it. Wolves do it. Dogs do it. Including dogs watching their own human owners yawn, not just other dogs. Even some parakeets show signs of it. That's an odd guest list for a trait supposedly rooted in sophisticated human self-awareness. If contagious yawning were fundamentally about modeling another mind's inner life, you'd expect it to show up only in the handful of species smart enough to pull that off. Instead, it's scattered across the animal kingdom in a pattern that looks less like a marker of high intelligence and more like an ancient, blunt social signal inherited and repurposed by whatever species happen to be wired for group living. And here's the detail that should make you glance sideways at your own friend group. Campbell and de Waal's chimpanzee research found chimps caught yawns significantly more often from chimps they knew than from unfamiliar chimps on video, an in-group bias tracking closely with social bonding. Human studies echo it, almost exactly. People are statistically more likely to catch a yawn from a family member than a close friend, more likely from a close friend than an acquaintance, and least likely of all from a total stranger. Your yawn susceptibility is quite literally a leaderboard of who you're socially closest to, running constantly, completely outside your control, which is a slightly unsettling thing to realize is happening every time you're stuck in a conference room, making small talk with people you'd never voluntarily eat lunch with. Now, the detail I owe you from earlier, the tortoise. In 2011, researcher Anna Wilkinson ran a deceptively simple experiment on red-footed tortoises at the University of Lincoln. She exposed them to video and live demonstrations of tortoise yawning, an open mouth gape that superficially resembles the behavior, for extended periods, hunting for any hint of contagion. There wasn't one, not a flicker. Zero contagious response across every trial. Tortoises yawn. They just never catch it from each other, under any tested condition. That result matters precisely because of what tortoises are. Solitary animals. No tight social groups, no cooperative raising of young, no evolutionary need to read each other's internal states to survive. They're one of the very few tested species where contagious yawning simply doesn't exist. Compare that to chimps, wolves, dogs, humans, all deeply social, all group dependent, all catching yawns from each other constantly. The pattern emerging across 2 decades of scattered research isn't smart animals catch yawns. It's social animals catch yawns. The trait tracks with how much a species' survival depends on staying attuned to the group around it, not with how much brain power it has to spare, which is the actual turn here. And it's colder than it looks on the surface. If contagious yawning really is a byproduct of social wiring, a leftover signal from millions of years of animals needing to stay synchronized with their group, noticing fatigue spread through a troop of primates, so the whole group could rest together and stay safe, then every time you don't catch someone's yawn, your nervous system may be quietly telling you something you didn't ask to know. It's not proof you dislike someone. The data's too noisy for anything that's certain. But across thousands of trials, study after study, the pattern holds distance in a relationship shows up as a measurable dip in a completely involuntary reflex. You can fake a laugh at someone's joke. You can fake interest in someone's story about their weekend. Try faking your way into catching their yawn on command, and your body will simply refuse to cooperate. There's something almost eerie about a social signal you can't consciously override in either direction. You can't force it. You can't fully suppress it either. Once it's strong enough, sit with that because it scales past one meeting room. Every open office where people stifle yawns behind a coffee cup during a Monday briefing is running an invisible social experiment nobody designed. Every group chat, every long-distance friendship maintained through a screen instead of a room. Researchers testing auditory contagious yawning, whether just hearing a yawn without seeing it can trigger the response, have found the effect is strongest between close friends, weaker with acquaintances, and drops further once real physical distance and infrequent contact enter the picture. Your body might be less loyal to your online friendships than you'd like to believe. It's not being cruel about it. It's running code that predates language, predates cities, predates the concept of a friend you've never actually met. There's a modern wrinkle to this that researchers are only starting to poke at seriously. What happens when the yawning isn't even live? You've probably caught one from someone on a video call, mid-sentence, badly hidden behind a muted mic, and felt a strange flicker of guilt about it, like getting caught skimming an email instead of listening. That flicker is the same ancient circuit trying to process a face that's technically in the room and technically isn't. Nobody has fully mapped out what a decade of staring at compressed, slightly delayed faces on a screen is doing to a reflex built for firelight and physical proximity. But early results suggest the signal gets weaker, not stronger, the more digital the connection is, which might be the least surprising sentence in this entire video. You catch yawns from your mother because millions of years of primate ancestors depended on staying synchronized with kin. You catch them from your closest friends because your nervous system still treats close friend the way a chimp treats another chimp from its own troop. You don't catch them from a stranger on the train, from an actor on a screen you've never met, or from a tortoise, because a tortoise never needed you to notice it was tired, and it certainly never needed to notice you. None of this is really about yawning anymore, is it? It's about the fact that you're carrying a hidden social sensor that's been quietly running assessments on every relationship in your life since before you could form a memory. It doesn't lie to flatter you. It doesn't yawn back out of politeness, the way you might force a smile at a bad joke from your boss. It fires or it doesn't, and the data it's collecting has nothing to do with what you'd consciously choose to feel about the people around you. There's more ground to cover before this pays off completely, and the next part is where the reflex stops making sense in the tidy way you've probably assumed all along. Rewind for a second to something that should bother you. If yawning is a brain-cooling reflex, why does it show up right before something intensely demanding, not just before sleep? Watch footage of Olympic sprinters in the blocks, or fighter pilots strapping into a cockpit before a mission, and you'll catch them yawning in the seconds before the moment that matters most. That's the opposite of what you'd predict from the yawning, means your tired script. Most of us grew up on. These aren't drowsy people. They're people about to perform at the outer edge of their nervous system's capacity. Gallup's brain, cooling research, reframes the whole reflex here. A cooler brain isn't just a calmer brain, it's a more efficient one. Neurons fire faster and more reliably within a narrower, cooler temperature range, so a yawn right before a high-stakes moment may work less, like tapping the brakes and more like a driver, blipping the throttle before the light turns green, forcing a quick thermal reset to get every system running at peak output. Divers report yawning compulsively on the deck before a competition dive. Musicians yawn in the wings before walking on stage. It's not boredom. It's closer to a systems check under pressure, happening at the exact moment you'd assume your body should be flooded with adrenaline, instead of a reflex we associate with lazy Sunday afternoons. Two opposite emotional states, triggering the identical physical response. That alone should tell you a yawn is doing something more mechanical and less emotional than we give it credit for. Here's a darker thread, and it's the one neurologists actually lose sleep over. For most of us, yawning is background noise, easily ignored. For a small number of patients, it becomes a symptom worth investigating. Clinicians have documented cases of excessive, uncontrollable yawning tied to brainstem lesions, to multiple sclerosis flare-ups, and this tends to unsettle people once they hear it, to certain types of stroke, sometimes appearing as an early warning sign before more obvious symptoms set in. There are also documented cases of a sudden spike in yawning frequency during withdrawal from certain antidepressants, particularly a class called MAOI, well established enough that physicians are trained to ask about it directly. The same reflex that fires when you're mildly bored in a lecture hall can, in rare circumstances, be your nervous system flashing a warning light about something happening deep in your brainstem. Most excessive yawning is nothing: poor sleep, low iron, plain fatigue. But doctors don't dismiss a sudden dramatic surge in yawning without asking more questions, because every so often, it's the first domino. There's a myth sitting right next to that one, worth clearing up before it spreads any further. Plenty of people assume a yawn always signals fatigue or low arousal. The sprinters and the stroke patients prove that wrong from opposite directions. One shows yawning ramping up right before peak alertness. The other shows it as a red flag, totally disconnected from how tired someone actually feels. A yawn isn't a mood. It's closer to a thermostat click. And thermostats don't care whether the room is about to host a nap or a sprint. Pull the lens back further, past humans and chimps and tortoises, and there's a cross-species pattern Gallup and his collaborators uncovered. That's almost too clean to believe. They measured yawn duration across a wide range of mammals, mice, rats, camels, elephants, humans, and lined those durations up against number of cortical neurons and overall brain size in each species. The correlation held with striking consistency. Species with larger, more dense brains yawn measurably longer. A mouse yawns for a fraction of a second. A human yawn runs roughly 6 seconds on average. An elephant with a brain built around 3 times the neuron count of a human's has been recorded yawning for well over 10 seconds at a stretch. If the brain cooling theory holds, that tracks. A bigger, hotter engine needs a longer blast of the radiator fan to bring its temperature back down. Your yawn duration is, bizarrely, a rough proxy for how much processing power you're hauling around in your skull, which is either the most flattering or the most mundane thing your yawns have ever told anyone about you, depending on how you choose to spin it at that same dinner table. Before we close this out, one more thread pulls the story out of the lab entirely, back into culture, back into superstition, because humans didn't wait for a psychology department to get uneasy about yawns. Long before Provine ever filmed his first undergraduate, the Roman writer Hippocrates, and later medieval physicians, treated a yawn as something almost dangerous, a moment where the body was briefly physically vulnerable. Across cultures with no contact with each other, parts of ancient Europe, West Africa, the Middle East, the same instinctive gesture survived into modern etiquette: cover your mouth when you yawn. The stated reason has shifted over centuries, but the earliest recorded versions weren't about manners at all. They were about keeping something from getting in or something from getting out, a wandering evil spirit slipping through an open mouth, or, in some folk traditions, your own soul briefly escaping through it. Nobody actually believes that anymore, obviously, but you'll still watch nearly everyone in a room instinctively raise a hand to their mouth mid-yawn, a leftover ritual gesture with a spiritual origin. Nobody consciously remembers, performed automatically by people who'd laugh if you told them why their grandmothers started doing it. One more thread, and it's the piece that finally explains what all of this is actually for. Not just where a yawn comes from, but what catching one is doing for you biologically, right as it happens. In 2021, Andrew Gallup, the same researcher behind the brain cooling work, ran an experiment that sounds almost too simple to matter. He had people watch footage of others yawning, then tested how quickly they could spot a hidden object in a cluttered scene, a snake tucked into foliage, the kind of threat a primate brain evolved specifically to notice fast. People who just watched someone yawn detected snake faster than people who hadn't. Watching a yawn didn't make anyone sleepier. It made them sharper. That result has now been replicated more than once, and it's the backbone of what researchers call the group vigilance hypothesis. A yawn spreading through a group isn't dragging everyone down into drowsiness together. It may be doing almost the opposite, priming everyone nearby to pay closer attention, right when the first yawner's own alertness was dipping. One member of the group gets tired, and instead of that weakness spreading unchecked, the whole group's watchfulness quietly ticks upward to cover the gap. There's a second piece to this that's even stranger because it's not about attention anymore. It's about movement. In 2021, a team studying wild lions in Botswana, led by researcher Gracia Caseta, documented something nobody had confirmed outside a lab before. After one lion yawned and a nearby lion caught it, the two were significantly more likely to then get up and move together, in the same direction, within the same short window. Not because they'd agreed on a plan. The yawn chain itself seemed to function as a starting gun, quietly sinking bodies that had no other way to coordinate. Which reframes the whole reflex one more time. Not just a fatigue signal, not just a vigilance cue, but occasionally a wordless, let's move, pass between animals that can't hold a conversation about it. Here's the myth. Correction footnote worth sitting with, because it undercuts the empathy story one more notch with the biggest sample size in the field yet. A 2023 replication study surveyed 458 people across 50 different nationalities, testing yawn contagion against multiple validated psychopathy scales at once. The pattern from the older, smaller studies mostly held people scoring higher on certain psychopathy measures did catch yawns somewhat less often. But when researchers checked which factor actually predicted contagious yawning best across the whole dataset, it wasn't empathy and it wasn't psychopathy. It was simple tiredness. How sleepy you already were in that exact moment beat every personality measure in the study combined. So the next time someone smugly claims your friend must not care about you because they didn't catch your yawn at dinner, the more boring and more accurate explanation is probably that they got 4 hours of sleep the night before, not that you've quietly been unfollowed from their inner circle. It's also worth being honest about how narrow this trait is across the animal kingdom, because the field has quietly ruled out almost as many species as it's confirmed. Ravens don't catch yawns from each other. A 2022 observational study on juvenile ravens found zero evidence of contagion, despite ravens being famously intelligent. Neither do lemurs, despite being primates. Neither, as we covered, do tortoises. Contagious yawning isn't a tax paid by every social or every intelligent species. It belongs to a narrower, stranger lineage than that, still being mapped one disappointed null result at a time. So back to you. Back to that 11-week. Old on the ultrasound screen one last time. That fetus wasn't cooling an overheated brain on purpose, wasn't syncing up with a herd, wasn't catching anything from anyone. It was running a reflex. So old, it started firing before there was a self there to feel bored. Everything that reflex became after that. The ancient superstition about covering your mouth, the lion pair rising to their feet together in the Kalahari, the tortoise that never once caught on, the sprinter yawning before the gun, got bolted onto that same original circuit, generation after generation, species after species, each one repurposing it for whatever its particular kind of group living demanded. Here's the word IOU. Doctors and physiologists call the full combination, the deep inhale, the jaw stretch, and the whole body stretch that so often rides, along with it, arms overhead, spine-arching pandiculation. It's not just a yawn. It's a coordinated full-body reboot. Your nervous system runs on a script older than your species, older than mammals splitting off from reptiles, older than the idea of a self that could get bored in the first place. You've spent this entire video thinking you were learning about a small, slightly embarrassing bodily glitch. What you are actually looking at is one of the oldest surviving instructions your nervous system still runs, and it's still deciding right now, without asking you, who in your life it trusts enough to answer to. Next time you catch someone's yawn without meaning to, or notice you very specifically didn't, that's not nothing. Your body already voted. It just didn't wait for you to check the comment section first.